기자분들, hop on the beat!
Welcome back to Debunking Araki Forgot. Part 6 is by far the most hated part by Western fans, and many of the issues people have with this part are some of the most illogical ones in the entire series. Some of the things that people have said about this part are so insane that they hardly even warrant being talked about. It feels like everyone's brains started to rot as soon as they read this part, or they just speed read it to get to part 7. The first thing people mention is why Jolene needed the stand arrow to awaken her stand, instead of getting it from Jonathan's body being pierced like the other Joestars. This is an example of what I'm talking about. How could Jolene have possibly gotten a stand from Jonathan's body being pierced when she wasn't even born until years after that event? It is even said in the part that Jolene would not have directly inherited a stand. I've seen some people say that Jolene got sick just like Josuke, but this is referring to an unrelated cold that she had, as an example of how she views Jotaro as a bad father, not the same sickness that Josuke and Holly had. When Jolene first meets Emporio, he gives her a bone to hold onto, and warns her to not enter the visitor's room. A huge amount of people have said that this scene was never expanded on, and some even say Emporio's warning is some kind of dropped plot point involving Made in Heaven. Others have even thought that this is Dio's bone, despite it looking completely different. This is yet another example of what I mean. Emporio directly explains exactly what the purpose of this bone was. The bone belonged to his mother, who was killed by Whitesnake, and he gave the bone to Jolene to warn her about the incoming attack. Holding on to the bone brought her back to reality and helped her escape the dream. The only explanation for how people could be confused by this is if they just flat out did not read this panel. During the fight against Manhattan Transfer, Jotaro and Jolene become trapped in the dream, while in reality they are slowly being killed by acid. This is an attack by Pucci's stand Whitesnake. Many people have asked why this ability was not used again. Other people have asked how Whitesnake, a stand with a D in speed, was able to steal Jotaro's discs when Star Platinum is much faster. These two questions actually share the same answer. In JoJo Veller, Araki writes that Whitesnake's D in speed is referring to the speed of the acid attack. It takes a very long time to do, and at this point, Jolene and Emporio are already aware of this ability and how to escape it. It is only really useful on someone unsuspecting. However, Pucci is still shown using this ability again in some capacity. Whitesnake is shown to have two general powers, illusions and discs. His illusions are able to create the dream, and also disguise his own stand. Whitesnake is first shown taking memories and stands as discs. Later on, he has other uses for them, like giving commands, removing eyesight, and even playing CDs. People have said that Pucci should only be able to take stand and memory discs. I don't see why people could think his power has such an arbitrary limit when it was never established that that was all that Whitesnake could do. Whitesnake's ability is to insert or remove aspects of things using discs, and it was never implied that this was only limited to stands and memories. The Manhattan Transfer fight is a perfect example of the blatant skimming done in Part 6. This has gotten to the level where people don't even know if Jangali A actually exists, despite him clearly being shown outside of the dream where he is killed by Pucci. During a flashback with Pucci and Dio, it appears to be daytime outside of the window. Many people ask how this is possible when Dio is a vampire. This is a mistake in the color scans made by Shueisha. Araki has nothing to do with the color choices made here. In the original black and white, the outside of the window is white. Some people still refuse to accept this explanation, and have said that since it is white outside the windows, it must be daytime. This is not true, since there are dozens of other scenes that we know take place at night, still using a white background. After Part 5, I never thought I'd have to deal with the question of stands reviving people again, but some people just can't be satisfied, and have seriously gotten to the point where they say Limp Bizkit breaks this rule, despite this stand not actually bringing anything to life, and instead making invisible apparitions of them entirely separate from their corpse. After the Limp Bizkit fight, Hermes is absent from the story for quite a while, and does not reappear until after Jailhouse Lock. Many people have asked why this happened, and often list it as an example of a flaw with Part 6. It was clearly said that Hermes was incapacitated by her injuries, including her head being split in half. The following fights in the punishment ward all take place minutes apart, so there's no way she would have made a return there. It's only after the jailhouse lock fight when enough time had passed for her to be back in shape. This is exactly like Kakuin's absence from a portion of Part 3, after his eyes were injured. Some people have even asked why FF didn't just heal her, despite that being exactly what happened. Once again, there is really no explanation for how people could think this other than them just not reading it. When speaking with Pucci about the stand survivor, Dio calls it the weakest stand. Back in Part 3, Dio told Joseph that his stand was the weakest. People have called this a contradiction when Dio is simply taunting Joseph here, pointing out that among the other Crusader stands, Hermit Purple is the weakest, and telling him that it is futile to attack him when he had already dispatched Hierophant Green easily moments before. It is shown in Part 6 that Pucci was loyal to Dio in the 1980s. This has led to people asking why Pucci wasn't there in Part 3 to protect him. Dio is an extremely careful person in Part 3, so I don't see why he would do something like this. Dio knows that if he were to die, Whitesnake would be the only chance of heaven ever being attained again, so why would he then throw Pucci at the Crusaders like another one of his minions? Dio had Pucci remain uninvolved and continue his work towards the Heaven Plan in America. For whatever reason, a large amount of people believe that the initial goal of Pucci's plan was to resurrect Dio, and that it was changed into the plan to attain heaven. I don't see how this became so common, since it was never implied that Pucci was going to completely resurrect Dio. He knew the nature of Sportsmax's ability, and that it would only give life to what he had access to. Pucci even brings up the Heaven Plan in this exact scene. When the character Anasui is first introduced, he has a female appearance. Later on, he is shown to be male. This is one of the most commonly pointed out inconsistencies, while others say that he was pressured by editors to change this. The idea that Araki was pressured by his editors over this is completely unfounded. Now for the in-universe explanation. Many people act like this change came completely out of nowhere and was never acknowledged by any of the characters. This is incorrect, since FF expresses confusion as to whether Anasui is a man or a woman. We are also shown that Diver Down is able to completely reconstruct the anatomy of people. Anasui's female form could easily be his cover to watch Jolene in the female prison, since he was clearly aware of who she was beforehand. Still on the topic of Anasui, many have pointed to Diver Down's ability, saying it was changed after its initial appearance. In the first appearance, the ability is described as storing his power and speed into objects and then releasing it. However, this is just one part of his ability. He still uses this ability to store energy whenever he uses his stand to protect people, so any attacks coming towards them are absorbed by the stand instead. Diver Down's primary ability is to dive inside of objects. Many people have said that this is no different from normal stand phasing, which would make Diver Down a stand with no ability. Some have even attempted to say that stand phasing was removed to make Diver Down's ability unique. This is blatantly untrue, and stands have continued to be shown phasing as usual. Diver Down has complete control of the objects it inhabits, and can reconstruct them from the inside out. He is also seen bringing objects directly through walls, as opposed to Star Platinum, which had to find an opening for objects. Many people have said that the Dio we see in Part 6 has undergone a massive personality change, and that there was no trace of his current temperament in previous parts. This is completely false. In Part 6, all of Dio's appearances are with Pucci, who is a trusted confidant. We have already been shown that Dio remains extremely calm around people he considers useful, and in the case of Pucci, it may even be genuine. In his first full appearance from Part 3, he launches into a monologue describing the peace of mind that he seeks, which is completely in line with his heaven philosophy from Part 6. People seem to label Dio as a character who is just mindlessly seeking power, when really, after his 100 years in the coffin, he had become extremely introspective, a detail of his character everyone seems to ignore. After fusing with the Green Baby, Pucci begins his path to achieving his Heaven Plan. Pucci is shown accidentally using his Made in Heaven power and speeds up time. This speeding is different from how Made in Heaven operates later, since it causes aging. People have said that this is inconsistent, since he should not have Made in Heaven at this point, and later on when he is speeding up time, it is shown not affecting living things. This is a misunderstanding of Pucci's plan and his powers. After the fusion, his original stand Whitesnake started to slowly transform into his new gravity-manipulating stand, Sea Moon. The goal of this was to get to specific coordinates at Cape Canaveral. where manipulating gravity in a certain way can bend time in the way Pucci desires. C-Moon's manipulation of gravity has always been able to affect time, but he can't fully master it until he gets to the right coordinates and evolves his stand. Pucci definitely could speed up aging, but doing so would go completely against his plan, which is to bring every living creature into a new universe. So when he does get made in heaven, he intentionally avoids speeding up life. Many people have asked how Pucci and Weather Report end up with Joestar birthmarks. Some have said that this is impossible since they are not related to the Joestars, and others say that the birthmarks were a dropped plot point that served no purpose. Both of these are wrong. The Green Baby was a physical revival of the Dio from Part 3, who had begun adapting to Jonathan's body. Because of this, the Green Baby had a birthmark. After saying the 14 phrases, Pucci merged with it and got the birthmark. Throughout the series, we've seen that certain bloodlines have psychic connections. This is first seen in Part 3, where the Joestars gain stands from Jonathan's body and can sense each other. The same thing is seen with Enya and Jay Guile, who have shared injuries. Jotaro and Jolene are also shown sharing injuries in Part 6. Pucci and Weather are twins and have a similar connection. When Pucci was pierced with the arrow, Weather received the same wound and gained a stand as well. So when Pucci received the birthmark, one also appeared on Weather. As for saying that the birthmarks were never brought up again, this is just ridiculous. Weather is shown using his birthmark to sense Pucci and the Sons of Dio, and it also serves as a hint to his relation to Pucci that was revealed later. And Pucci being able to sense Jolene is one of the most important plot points in the final battle, and the entire reason for Jolene's sacrifice. In the Underworld fight, Jolene is shown stabbing Underworld with a pen. People say that this is contradictory to previous parts, since they say physical objects cannot harm stands. For starters, this rule was never set in stone, since what people are actually referring to is the rule that humans can't touch stands. This is completely irrelevant, however, since it was directly stated that this is not a normal pen, but one that was part of the memory made by Underworld. When Dio first met Pucci, he was shown healing his disfigured foot. For some reason, many have asked how he was able to do this with no healing ability, despite it already being shown that Dio can heal people, including reattaching a severed head. Some have asked how Weather was able to live normally after his memory disk was removed, while Jotaro ended up in a coma and needed his memory disk to awaken. This is because Weather only had his memory removed. He still has his stand disk. Jotaro had both removed and wouldn't recover until he got both of them back. In his backstory, Pucci learns that Weather is his twin brother, and that Weather is unknowingly romancing his own sister. He hires a private detective to split them up, without knowing that the detective was a member of the KKK. The detective learned that Weather's father is black and tried to have him killed. Some people have asked why the detective did not try to have Pucci killed as well when he is darker than Weather is. This whole course of events seems to have a lot of confusion surrounding it, and people have gotten very touchy on the subject of Pucci's race. So I'll go over everything that we know for sure. Pucci and Weather are twins born to parents who both appear to be white. Weather was stolen at birth by a different mother and raised separately from Pucci. Weather's adopted mother eventually married a man who was black. This is the man that the detective assumed was Weather's biological father. Since Weather, who he presumed to be mixed, was romancing Perla, who is white, the KKK intervened and attempted to lynch Weather. It was never implied that Pucci has any actual African heritage. He's just simply tan. People seem to have skimmed this, since I have seen a variety of incorrect interpretations. Some people have said that the detective learned Weather's race because he is related to Pucci. Despite it being directly told to you that this is not how he learned about this, that scenario is completely impossible, since Pucci is the only one aware of his relation to Weather. Many of the scenarios people come up with seem to forget that Pucci, Weather, and Perla were all born to the same parents, who would all have identical heritage. Other people who argue over Pucci's race confuse Weather's adopted father with his biological father, despite them being completely different people. The idea here is that if you're going to argue about something, at least make sure you have the basic dialogue said in the manga correct. In the flashback, Dio gives Pucci a stand arrow, which later grants him a stand. Some people have actually asked why Pucci didn't get a Requiem stand when this is the beetle arrow seen in Part 5. For starters, there is no confirmation that this arrow operates differently from the others. Even if it did, Requiem stands are caused by the arrow piercing a stand, not from piercing someone for the first time. Others ask how this could possibly be the same arrow, since the beetle arrow was found by Polnareff later. This is just ridiculous, since Pucci clearly just brought the arrow back to Egypt when he visited Dio, where it would be left over for Polnareff to find after Dio's death. Some people even forget that Polnareff found it in Egypt at all, and somehow think he found it in the random Italian farmhouse where he stayed. There is some discourse surrounding the abilities of the stand weather report. Some ask how it is possible for him to make it rain frogs like during the Savage Garden arc. Weather report can manipulate the weather, which is an extremely broad concept. It is actually a surprisingly common occurrence in real life for frogs or other small animals to be picked up by tropical storms and dropped somewhere else. The most powerful ability of weather report is heavy weather, which is used near the end of the manga. People seem to have problems with this ability. Some say that it should not be possible for the people to turn into snails. Others say that they are not actually snails, and that them having snail-like capabilities should not be possible. And finally, some seem to think that this ability has nothing to do with the weather at all. All of these seem to completely misunderstand how this ability works. Heavy weather manipulates the weather by changing the ozone layer. By doing this, sunlight is refracted in a certain way for a subliminal message to appear to anyone who sees sunlight. The manga uses the example of the movie theater to show how this works. The subliminal message of the popcorn in the movie causes people to be hungry. This shows that a subliminal message can cause a biological change. Heavy weather takes this to the extreme, where people believe that they are snails so much that they begin to actually change into them. While fighting Seamoon, Jolene attacks it with a kick. People say that this contradicts the rule of humans being unable to attack stands. This comes from a lack of understanding of Jolene's stand. Stone Free is made from Jolene's string, which is a physical part of her body. Because of this, Jolene's body itself would have the properties of a stand. Back in Part 5, the stand Notorious B.I.G. would track the fastest object nearby, match its speed, and attack it. At the end of the fight, it was dropped into the ocean where it chased waves from then on. In Part 6, Pucci begins moving at extreme speeds using Made in Heaven. I have seen some people seriously asking why B.I.G. didn't lock on to Pucci. I have no idea how so many people can get both of these stands completely wrong. Notorious B.I.G. doesn't track the fastest thing in the world, otherwise it would have never gone after tiny movements done by Trish or the clock. And it would have never been trapped in the waves in the first place. It would have just locked onto anything faster than the waves and escaped. B.I.G. only tracks objects close to it. Pucci was all the way over in Cape Canaveral, almost 5,000 miles away. But even if they were closer, it still wouldn't matter, since people are also missing how Made in Heaven works. Pucci isn't the only thing moving fast, the entire universe is constantly accelerating, meaning hundreds of thousands of things other than Pucci for B.I.G. to lock onto. It was even directly shown in Part 6 that the waves were being sped up by Made in Heaven as well. B.I.G. would just continue chasing the waves, which are now moving much faster than before. Now we get to return to a previous Araki forgot, Starfinger. Ever since its use in Part 3, for some reason people have continued to wonder why Jotaro didn't use this ability again, even asking why it wasn't used in fights where it would be utterly worthless. The newest one of these is in the final fight of Part 6, where Jotaro tries to attack Pucci for the final time. People seem to think that Starfinger would have made a huge difference here, when Jotaro was late by 2 steps to hit Pucci. As I've already said in the Part 3 video, Starfinger has only been shown to be useful when Jotaro is unable to move. If he can move, there's really no point. Star Platinum is an extremely fast stand. Jotaro's movement is completely unrestrained here, so the fastest method of attack would be to move his stand up to Pucci and punch him. People somehow think that Starfinger is faster than Jotaro's normal punches, despite that never being the case. Attacking with his full power is faster. People also propose other ridiculous ideas like moving Jolene out of the way with Starfinger, which is completely unnecessary since she is 1 foot away from him. What people seem to miss the most in this scene is that Jotaro was distracted. Anasui was planning to absorb the damage of Pucci's attack and leave him open for an attack by Jotaro. Pucci found a way around this, leaving no such opening. Jotaro also had to protect Jolene from the thrown knives, which made him just a second late to attacking Pucci. All of these things occur in the final 2 seconds of Jotaro's time stop, which is already being shortened by Made in Heaven. Possibly the most common question involving Part 6 is about what happened to Giorno. After Pucci got the birthmark, 3 of Dio's sons were drawn to him. Giorno seems to have been not affected by this, since he is not present in Part 6. The 3 sons we see in Part 6 were shown to be failures, who would easily be influenced by the presence of Pucci. Giorno would not fall for this in the same way. Many people point to the Regiel bio page, which says that Giorno may be in Florida. What none of those people seem to realize is that this page was added in the volume release, after the chapters had already been published. I feel like the main reason people are so concerned over this is that they believe Giorno would be able to reverse Made in Heaven with Gold Experience Requiem. That is probably true, but that would require Giorno to actually be in the fight. Despite this, some people even suggest that Giorno should have been able to reverse it from anywhere in the world and that Araki just forgot about it. This idea makes a lot of assumptions about Giorno's ability. We simply do not have a lot of information about it. In the one occurrence of it, Requiem's ability only activated when he was about to be attacked by Diavolo. The universe speeding up indiscriminately around him would not be considered a direct attack. In the finale, Emporio tricks Pucci into inserting Weather Report's disc into him. There are a few questions surrounding this moment. Some ask why Emporio needed Pucci to insert the disc in the first place, when people have been able to manipulate discs on their own before. This was because of the effects of the universe reset. Pucci had successfully created a universe where everyone knows exactly what will happen to them and is bound to carry out their own fated movements. Only Pucci is able to alter fate in this universe. This is why Emporio needed to manipulate Pucci into pushing the disc in, since he cannot control when or if he will insert it himself. Others ask how Emporio is able to use Weather Report and burning down the house at the same time. This is a common misconception with stand discs. It has never been established that you couldn't use the power of an inserted disc when you already have a stand. When Jolene inserted Star Platinum's disc, she used it for a moment before it removed itself. Later on, Pucci inserted a stand into FF that boiled the water she was trying to get. When Weather's disc was first found, Anasui said that it was only a fragment of Weather's power. These factors make it perfectly capable of being used by Emporio for a short time. While not necessarily related to Araki Forgot, there is a huge amount of misinformation surrounding the ending. I'd like to go over a few of them, since the ultimate goal of these videos is to correct the record on these types of things. Possibly due to the skimming I've talked about, a staggering amount of people just do not seem to comprehend how Made in Heaven works at all, or what Pucci's goal was. The first thing to dispel is the idea that the universe resetting kills people. This is so common that I tried to address it back in the Part 6 death count video, apparently to little effect. Nobody is killed by the universe reset itself. Once the singularity point is reached, everything that is currently alive is taken and placed back into the new universe. Pucci's plan is entirely reliant on people being alive to remember their previous actions, otherwise it would be completely pointless. Another thing people do is connect the ending of Part 6 with Part 7. These are completely unrelated, and Araki has said as much himself. It would also make no sense, since Made in Heaven does not dictate the events that happened before Part 6. Jotaro and Jolene still exist in this new universe, which would not line up with the family tree seen in Part 8. The annoying thing about this is people that just spoil Part 6 whenever someone asks about Part 7 by telling them the universe was reset. The proper way to explain this to uninitiated people would be to say that the story concluded in Part 6, and that Part 7 is the start of a new story that simply pays homage to the first. It's also a common trend to say that Pucci won in Part 6 since the universe was reset. This is not true. Pucci's goal is not simply to reset the universe, it's to attain his idea of heaven, which is a universe in which everyone knows their own destiny. A universe like this was briefly created, but thanks to Jolene's sacrifice, Emporio managed to cross over into it. This move forced Pucci to temporarily halt his plan, and stop the acceleration at around the point where Part 6 started, when he could corner Emporio in the prison. But this was also where he was outsmarted and killed by Emporio. The universe made after this is free from Pucci's influence, and all of the events of Part 6, including the countless deaths from the second half, are reverted. Jolene and the others are even restored into better lives where they are no longer on the run from the law. Implying that Pucci somehow won in this scenario is completely misreading his character motivation and the ending of the part. And that was every Araki forgot for part 6. I feel like this is the most important video that I have done for this series, since the Western fandom's opinion of part 6 has been among some of the most misinformed things I've ever seen. I really just don't see how people can have these ridiculous issues when so many of them are just completely understood if they actually read the part. Hopefully this video can start to turn the tide somewhat in the other direction. Part 7 on the other hand is received positively for the most part, and while there are some Araki forgots that come to mind, I'm not certain that it will be enough for its own video. Leave your Araki forgot suggestions for part 7 in the comment thread below. If you want updates on new videos, or want to ask questions, join the Hum and Beat Discord server using the link in the description, and for future videos, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. This is the part of the video where I thank my $5 and $10 patrons. Thank you Norton the Lich, thank you Alex Ramirez, thank you Raziana, thank you Boat Girl, thank you Laura, thank you Insane Penguin, thank you Nax, and thank you Felipe.